So, good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar for Your Way Together. For those of you who are new to our webinars or cooperatives first, we are a business development organization created to bring awareness of the co-op model to rural and Indigenous communities throughout Western Canada. We are located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in the Treaties 6 territory, not far from the Wahkotowin Heritage Park, which has been a meeting place for people across the Northern Plains for more than 6,000 years. And we are in the homeland of the Métis. So I am Trista Piopasquerias, Indigenous Relations Lead, and I have Kyle White, once again, Governance and Education Lead. So as the Indigenous Relations Lead, I work directly with Indigenous communities, groups, and individuals who are looking to start cooperative businesses in their community. So today's discussion is, we're starting off with the co-op structure is not a new concept in our communities and have been used for thousands of years and continue to do so. Such as like a newly incorporated elders co-op that was established recently to preserve the Saulteaux language and culture, all the way to the River Select Fishermen's Co-op that 8 individual communities work together to market their ethically sourced fish and to be able to market it globally, to the numerous artisan co-ops throughout Turtle Island. So today I'm honored to have Charlotte Ross from the Montreal Lake Cree Nation here with us today as we discuss reconciling our history. Charlotte Ross is a registered band member of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. She loves working with communities, building capacity, empowering all people with the true history of our past while working towards a brighter and healthier future. As a third-year PhD student at the University of Victoria, specializing in Indigenous language and revitalization. She is a speaker, reader, and writer of the Cree language in the Woodland PH dialect and has taught university courses using materials written in the plain Y dialect. She assists her First Nation with developing Cree language materials along with other fluent speakers and is a part of a team that continues to update the Circle of Indigenous Languages website. Over the past 3 years, she has provided support for 27 mentor apprentice teams across Saskatchewan to work on their language proficiency in Cree and Saulteaux. Charlotte has experience as a board member for the Saskatchewan First Nations Economic Development Network and for Montreal Lake Business Ventures. So thank you, Charlotte, for being here, and I'm so honored to have you.
Thank you, Trista. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. Kita tamihin ipikakuit simin ota at sarauti at tawin. I'm really thankful to be here today to just tell a short little piece of our history. And reconciling our history is a really important part of moving together, moving forward in reconciliation. So when I was talking to Trista, I think it was probably about a year ago or maybe even longer, and we were thinking, how can we work together? How can I somehow support the Co-operatives First program that Trista was working with? And I knew Trista in another lifetime. And I say another lifetime because I've had, like a cat, I've had many, many lives. And the one part of my life, I was at the University of Saskatchewan for about 20 years. And so I got to know Trista as a student advisor. And so I'm really always impressed with all of the alumni, all of the students that I've had the privilege of working with, of getting to know, because the students are our future. They are our future is only as healthy as we can support our youth and support our students, support the young people as they're coming through. And so I raised my hands up to Trista and, to all of the colleagues that she has at Co-operatives, and just listening to the dialogue as I got on the call, around innovation and being creative, entrepreneurial. Those are all the values that we have had in our past history as Indigenous people across Turtle Island in North America, as well as in other parts of the world. Indigenous people have always been innovative. We've always been creative. We've always had to be entrepreneurs because that was what the backbone of our communities was based on. And the other part was being able to speak. So the Cree language, there's 5 dialects of Cree in Canada. And I'll show you a PowerPoint, but I just wanted to give you some back information on the importance of what we're talking about. The Cree language is really, it has been, and it still is, it's a language of business. And so there are very, very many Cree speakers. The largest numbers for Indigenous languages is Cree in Canada. And the Cree language goes all the way from the East Coast, all the way through Quebec, through the northern Quebec, Ontario, into Manitoba, of course, Saskatchewan, Alberta, the Northwest Territories, down into the United States as well. So when we think about Montana, we think about North Dakota, our languages were very, very widespread, and, people were multilingual. So they spoke more than one language, but Cree was a language of commerce. And so in order to do commerce, in order to do trade, in order to do business with other nations, Cree was a staple language. And so, individuals learned the language. It was easy to learn because there were so many speakers, and they were all over the country and in different dialects. And so, it's just it's a wonderful language to have. And, for those of us who are learning the language or relearning or reconnecting to the language, it's a wonderful gift to be able to have that. And so I just want to say I'm really thankful that Trista and I had the call in December about what we could do together. And this may actually be a series. Like, there may be a series of speakers that talk about this, because it's not just a one-time only for an hour on an afternoon Zoom call that is going to bring all the solutions, because different people have solutions and it takes a bit of time to do that. So I was just thinking about the intro that Trista was reading, and based on that intro, I'm really, really old, and so I have to admit I am old, and I love being old. I don't know of anywhere else that I would rather be. Is at this age, I'm probably, I don't even know how old I am, but I think I'm like 56 maybe, or something in that category, and. Comparatively speaking, for my son, he thinks I'm really, really old. But when I speak to the elders, they're like, "Oh, you're just young. You still have lots to learn." And so I'm really grateful to be able to be a student and to be able to learn about language revitalization. And my time spent with Saskatchewan First Nation Economic Development Network and the MLBV board, and just being involved in the world of business and the world of economic development is really part of my world. Has always been in business. I was raised in that, and I'll share that with you in the PowerPoint. But I'm just really grateful to be here, and I will ask Trista or Kyle to help me keep track of time so that I don't go over my time. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, and hopefully you can let me know if you're able to see it when I do start to share. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So the topic of what I wanted to share today is called Reconciling Our History. And so we're going to go through, different pieces of what that means, and how we can personalize that, how we can take some action to make reconciliation more than just a word, more than something that we see, flashing across a TV screen. it's an action, it's a word, and it has people behind it. And so one of the things that I wanted to do just before I start is just to do an acknowledgement and to say, thank you, ma gayain. So, we're all in different places in terms of where we're calling in from or where we're zooming in from. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that I have gratitude, inanas ko mo yan. So I'm really, really grateful for the land and the territory that I live in, Saskatchewan. It's home to First Nations that have lived here in harmony and cared for Kigawi Nawaski. So Kigawi Nawaski is the land, that's our Mother Earth. And, they've cared for that land since time immemorial, before signing legally binding treaties with the British Crown. And it's also the homeland of the Métis Nation. I recognize all Saskatchewan residents are treaty people and have a responsibility to understand our history so that we can honor the past, connect that past to the present, and create a bright and bountiful future for all members of this province. I want to introduce you to a couple of my greatest teachers, and we all have greatest teachers in our lives, in our families. So Noktawi, Igwanigawi. So my father is on the left side. His name was Edward Sandy Ross. My mother's on his left side, Elizabeth Sarah Ross. And so when my father passed away, he actually had another name as well. And because of legislation, because of being able to change names at the time of baptism based on whether or not your family, whether or not your mother or your father were abiding by the rules of the Indian Act or of the Indian agent or of the church. And so, at the time that he was born, his mother was a traditional medicine practitioner. So she practiced medicine. So did all of her brothers. And so when he was named after his uncles Edward, his uncle Sandy, his family members. And so when he was actually, I guess his name was recorded in the registry for baptism and for birth, it was actually Abel Stanley. So they put Abel Stanley instead of Edward Sandy. Nobody in his family was named that. Anyway, long story, we didn't know that he had actually been using Edward Sandy for all of his life. And then when he turned 65, he had to go get his birth certificate. They could find him. And so he asked his friend, who was a lawyer in Prince Albert, to help him track down, where his birth certificate was. So he told him the story of his mother and being forced off the reserve, being told she had to leave. Literacy was not common. So a paper was presented that had words on it in English. And they were told that she had to leave the reserve, that she was practicing. She was devil worshipping is what the terms were used. And so the church provided support because the ministers at that time, the Anglican Church, wanted our people to not practice the traditional ways any longer. And so the church supported that. The Indian agent supported. The chief, who actually happened to be her brother, also supported that because it was part of the Indian Act. And so they left the reserve. And that's why I have at the bottom here, Woodland Cree, a member of Montreal Lake Cree Nation, registered band member. We are now, but we haven't always been. And so when we think of our relationships and reconciliation, understanding the history, for every First Nation in Canada, and also in other locations in the US, but for sure in Canada, for every First Nation, there are at least one or two other communities, sometimes Métis communities, sometimes non-status, that are closely connected and tied. So if you had a map of and I'll show you a map later, of all the First Nations in Saskatchewan, you can double that or triple that in terms of how many communities there actually are. And then we can add on to that also the urban centers, the city, the larger towns and larger cities. So it's not black and white. Our history is not black and white. It never was. Our culture, our language was never black and white, and it is not something that was easy to understand. So we had to do lots and lots of visiting, lots and lots of storytelling. My parents were entrepreneurs at heart, and that's the environment that I came into. we were always berry picking, getting stuff ready. There was never a time that we were bored and had nothing to do. We were always sewing or beading. We had logging. My family was involved in logging. They were also involved in trapping and fishing and building roads and making things, construction. These buildings you see in the background, that was the Montreal Lake Hunting and Fishing Lodge. So as a child, I was part of this building of the cabins. So were all my family members. So were all the community members. And so, things were just made and you just had to have them done. You couldn't wait around for somebody to do them for you. And so that was the type of family that I was raised into and born a part of. The cooperatives, where did the cooperatives come in? Well, cooperatives were there from the very, very beginning. And so, we had I guess Prince Albert was the nearest location to where we lived. So we lived in Malinosa, north of Montreal Lake. We lived in Timber Bay. We lived in Wahkotowin. And so the Prince Albert Co-op was the nearest one. So the first name of the co-op in Wahkotowin, when there was an opportunity to have a co-op, was called Mamui. It was called Mamui Co-op, and Mamui in Cree is all of us, everybody. It includes all of us. It would be, I guess, in the Cree language terms, Mamui is used at the very beginning of words when you're wanting to include everything, you're wanting to include everybody. So that was our introduction to it. It was always there. So we've not ever had a time when we didn't have a co-op number. So my father had his co-op number. All the purchases we made went to his number. And then when we became 18 or turned 18, then we got our own numbers. So in this session, I want to share with you our history of Indigenous people in Canada, including the basis of assimilation. So where did this legislation come from? How was it that residential schools were able to be created? They didn't just all of a sudden pop out of a box or, just come with their own build it kit. There was many, many years of thinking, philosophy, of a mindset. And it's these ones here. It's the Papal Bulls, the Doctrine of Discovery, and Terra Nullius. It's those three that are the basis of assimilative legislation and residential schools. So how is that tied to the fur trade? Fur trade was post-contact was the economy. That was a source of economy. Prior to contact, there was already an economy. So when we think of, there weren't any ways of making a business or making a living or trade. That's again changing the narrative. So it's a false belief to think that there was nothing happening here. That's a very Western way of thinking about Turtle Island and about the land that's here. There were businesses, there were economies, there was thriving economies, thriving languages, and thriving nations. And how do we know that? We go back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Then moving ahead, how do we understand, where do we go from here? Understanding wahkotowin, or extended family relationships, as a foundation for building community and cooperation. And that's part of when we think about what are the values? I mean, I was thinking about this as I was getting ready for the presentation and, getting my material ready and thinking about, what is it that I really need to share? And so I do a lot of prayer, a lot of meditation, a lot of thinking about, what are the important things that we need to learn, and how can we do that in a good way? And, my son, we live in Rosetown. We moved out here about 10 years ago. And he works at the co-op here. So I was listening to the conversations. We've always had co-ops in our lives. So, he went to, he had a staff meeting yesterday evening or last evening. And so I just want to read the aspirational statement. As a community leader, we strive to make a positive impact by inspiring team members to live our values and bring our brand to life. All team members are responsible for providing a positive contribution, taking ownership of their actions, and working respectfully together for the benefit of our member owners and communities. And so, it was not, there wasn't anything intentional. about, getting Stephen to go work, or he wanted to go work at the co-op, but having him work at the co-op, that happened probably over a year and a half ago. So he's a part of that. He's a part of the co-op here in Rosetown. And so there's a certain mindset that goes along with that. It's a corporate mindset, and it has values attached to it. And so how are we going to do this? Because it's a big job that we have to carry out. So we're going to be the change. So you're going to be the change in your family, in your community, and your workplace. And if you need any help with being the change, that's why Trista has the webinars, and that's why we've got opportunity to learn while we're here. So I'm just going to take us to, and I told Trista I would just have some times where we would build, or I would build in some times for question. So is there anybody who has question at this point? Hearing none? Or I can't really see the chat, but does anybody have any questions? Okay, no questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. I'm going to continue on with my presentation here and just get into, hopefully I can get into this one. So just 1 minute, bear with me. Let me know if you can't see the video. Okay.
No, we can't see the video.
Okay, just 1 second. I'll do something else magical here. Just 1 second. Okay, there you go. Can see the screen now?
Yep, that's good.
Okay.
Why don't you people just get over it?
Why don't you people just get over it?
Why don't you people just get over it?
I've heard that for most of my life.
Over the course of the next few minutes,
We'd like to answer that question.
Let's go back to when all of this started.
Before the year 1492.
Before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, there were complex systems of government, trade, agriculture, and spirituality.
On both sides of the ocean.
On both sides of the ocean.
on the side that we refer to as Turtle Island,
what is more commonly referred to as North America.
It is estimated that we were as many as 20 million Indigenous peoples.
The Europeans knew nothing about us.
And we knew nothing about them.
Then Christopher Columbus got lost.
And so it began.
And in this new beginning, things weren't so bad.
We learned from each other and traded goods that we both needed.
We taught Europeans how to survive in the New World.
We were guides.
We shared our foods.
Corn, squash, beans, potatoes.
We shared our medicines.
We shared the land.
We signed peace and friendship treaties.
That were about, well, peace and friendship.
We fought wars together as allies.
Some of us fought with the French.
Some of us fought with the British.
And after the British were victorious on the plans of Abraham,
things began to change.
They wanted to segregate us from the thousands upon thousands of immigrants who were coming to the new colonies.
So they started to push us from our traditional territories onto reserves.
In the West, we were left with little choice.
The Hudson Bay Company killed all the buffalo.
We were starved onto the reserve.
In Upper and Lower Canada, they wanted to sign more treaties.
Not treaties about peace and friendship, but treaties about land ownership and title.
that forced us onto the reserve.
As time wore on, they kept coming back for more.
More land for settlers.
More land for mining.
More land for forestry.
More land for oil.
And as time wore on, we continued to resist.
So the colonizers switched tactics.
Instead of segregation, they tried to assimilate us into their society and culture.
They passed laws such as this one in 1857, an act to encourage the gradual civilization of Indian tribes.
Or this one in 1869.
An act for a gradual enfranchisement of Indians. And then, in 1876, the most racist piece of legislation of them all, the Indian Act.
Duncan Campbell Scott, head of the Department of Indian Affairs, said it all.
I want to get rid of the Indian problem.
These laws had a tremendous impact on our people.
If an Aboriginal woman married a non-Aboriginal man, she lost her identity.
If we went to universities, we lost our identities.
If we served in the armed forces, we lost our identity.
We weren't allowed to perform our ceremonies like the potlatch,
which was our way of sharing our things equally.
And then they did the unthinkable. They took away our children. They took away our children.
The residential school system was an attempted act of genocide against my people.
and still we resisted.
We fought back.
And we're still here.
Remember when I said they starved us onto reserves?
Today, they're trying to starve us off the reserves.
They're trying to make life in our communities unbearable.
In every measure, Aboriginal peoples fare much worse than other Canadians.
We have a shorter life expectancy.
We have higher levels of poverty. 1 in 4 Aboriginal children live in poverty.
We have higher rates of suicide.
We are 4 times more likely to contract tuberculosis.
Our diabetes rates are 3 times higher than the national average.
42% of our children lack basic dental care.
116 First Nations communities are currently under boil water advisories.
We represent only 2.7% of the adult population in Canada.
But 18% of the federal prison population.
Our high schools receive $2,000 less per student per year than provincially funded schools.
Nearly 600 Aboriginal women have been murdered or have gone missing
in the last 15 years.
These are the reasons we can't, we won't just get over it.
I am an Indigenous person.
I'm an Indigenous person.
And I'm a union member.
And I'm a union member.
And we think it's time to take the next step forward in the relationship between Canada and Aboriginal peoples.
It's time for Canada to stop its attempts to assimilate us into the general population.
It's time to walk down the path of reconciliation.
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 Please join us.
Join the Justice for Aboriginal Peoples campaign.
Thank you for being able to watch that video with me. It's a pretty harsh reality, when we think about where we've come from. So before we're able to start building a new bridge to say where do we want to go? Where's our path leading us? I think it's important to know where we came from. You have your hand up, John. I thought I seen something on your screen.
No, thanks very much. No, I was using the applause.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, to say thank you very much. That was very powerful and really good.
Thank you. And when you take a look at the date of that's 10 years ago, and so when we take a look at how long has reconciliation, how long have we been working on different aspects and different ways? It's been a long time, but yet in other ways it hasn't been very long. It seems like we just started, and so I just wanted to go back here to the PowerPoint so I can share with you other parts, for our learning. So what for you, and you can maybe write this in the chat, what's most impactful for your understanding of Indigenous history in Canada? It might be everything. It might be just one piece that is most impactful for you. But just to keep that in the back of your mind, to think, what did I learn, or what don't I know? There might be a lot to learn. There might be a lot that we don't know yet. And I was going to have a little card, but when individuals ask us what and why are we doing this? Why is it important? There's actually I think the calls to action and also the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, you can get them in little tiny cards and little tiny books, and you can also get a card for them. Have in your back pocket, so when somebody is not wanting to address it, or it's not important, it doesn't need to be on the agenda. It's actually it is important, and this is part of our history. We're finding more and more of the children that never made it home from residential schools. And when we look at the PRC calls to action, we look at it's in there. So the calls to action acknowledge that there were a lot of children that died at residential schools that never made it home. And so now with the uncovering of the children's bodies at all the residential schools across Canada and in the US as well, it's going to continue to happen. And so it's not anything that we can turn a blind eye towards and say it's not important, it didn't happen. It did happen, and the only way we can face it is to go right through it. So in terms of economic, what does this have to do with economic development and having a co-op? Under Section 92, the corporate sector call to action talks about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So, there's important aspects to economic development, building cooperatives, to having cooperatives work. And, the very first one is to have meaningful consultation, to build respectful relations in free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before proceeding. For too long, none of that has happened in corporate Canada. When we take a look at how economic development has unfolded, and so that's where we get there are a lot of issues that happen. When economic development moves forward and there's no informed consultation. So it starts with education. I think the TRC chair was Marie Sinclair. He said, education got us into this mess, and education has to take us out of this mess. So this is part of what Trista's doing with the webinars, is it's providing some education for individuals who just want to know, like, what happened, and then what can I do with what happened. So we're going to give you some ideas on what we can do and where we can go. There is a website, a couple websites actually. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation is one, nctr.ca. So this has historical documents and also current events. It's all in one location on the website. Their physical location is in Winnipeg at the University of Manitoba campus. And then the other website that was used while TRC was going on is trc.ca. It includes locations of schools, plus a lot of resources for survivors. It includes historical archival information for individuals who may not know what the residential schools were about in Canada. I wanted to just transition over to the treaty map of Saskatchewan. This is in the OTC material on the website as well. And so I do some treaty kit facilitating for the Office of the Treaty Commissioner as part of my work as consultant and trainer. And so there is a website you can go to, OTC, you can sign up. You don't necessarily need to be a teacher. There's a place on the website where you can register to have an account for this, to sign in. And if you can't remember, just use my email, charlotteross2010@yahoo.ca, and have a very high security password that I'll share with you. It's Treaty, TRAEATY. So if you want to use that, if you're having trouble creating an account, just use that. To get in to access the free material, because there are materials that are free on the OTC website, but you have to have an account to access that. When we take a look at this map, the creation of the province of Saskatchewan was in 1905. And so prior to 1905, there's a whole long history prior to that. And so that's why when you take a look at just the map of Saskatchewan, the treaty areas are not fully shown, because the treaty areas actually preceded provinces. So they preceded the provincial boundaries and territories. So When we think of Treaty 6, it goes, from Saskatchewan and Alberta. We think of Treaty 4, it's in Manitoba as well as in Saskatchewan. Treaty 2, same thing. Treaty 8 is in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. Treaty 10 is mostly Saskatchewan. But Treaty 5 is, in Saskatchewan. We have Saskatchewan nations as well as some First Nations in Manitoba that are part of Treaty 5. So we look at all of the territory here for Saskatchewan, and then we compare it to, and this is really looking at land. It's looking at how much land. So treaty signing was agreeing to share the land, agreeing to, making promises, and those promises were sworn on the pipe. So the pipe ceremony was part of treaty making. So when we think of agreeing to share the land, agreeing to teach one another our languages, our culture, different ways of working, and then so the treaty making process is ongoing. So in this area, it's Treaty 6, 1876, Treaty 4, 1874, Treaty 5, 1875. So during the 1870s, treaty making process is happening. It's before fax. It's before internet. It's before the telephone. The only way to communicate is by telegraph or by person. So a person had to travel from place to place. And so the treaty making process is ongoing. It's just happening as the dates show. Those are the dates when the treaties were finalized. We have to go back to 1876 with the Indian Act. So the Indian Act was consolidated. There were many versions of Indian Acts prior to that. And so it's consolidated into a final Indian Act. It's passed in Ottawa at the same time that Treaty 6 is being signed. So as the treaties are being made and negotiated in good faith, and you think about Alexander Morris, he was one of the lead commissioners in quite a few of the treaties in these areas. As he's making the treaty and negotiating treaty, the Indian Act is actually being passed. So when you think of the irony of making treaty and also having the Indian Act passed at the same time, we can understand why we have the situation we have today across the country. In reconciliation, when you look at the definition of reconciliation, it's the act of causing two people or groups to become friendly again after an argument or disagreement, or the process of finding a way to make two different ideas, facts, etc., exist or be true at the same time. So when we think about the definition of reconciliation, the historical facts of how treaty making proceeded, of how the Indian Act was finalized as treaty making was happening across the country, is it easy to do reconciliation? It's a challenge on the best of days, but nevertheless, we continue to work on reconciliation because that's our worldview. That's where we come from. The history behind, how did residential schools happen? How did treaty making happen? How did the consolidation of the Indian Act happen? How could that happen at the same time that Indigenous people are living in their territory? It was allowed to happen because of the papal bulls. So there were a number of papal bulls that were decreed. So a decree came through the Catholic Church and basically said, you have the right, and we'll fund you to do exploration. And doctrine of discovery was, if you find land that does not have the sign of a church or the sign of civilization or Bibles to be praying from, and if that's the case, if you come across land, then you have the right, through using the doctrine of discovery, to come in and say, okay, this land is for the taking, and if people are not able to worship according to the way I worship and according to the country that I'm from, the way we worship, then they're savage. And so the idea of having a savage mentality, or having I guess the value that would be the least of all value in your world, comes from the doctrine of discovery. And so terra nullius, so that gives individuals the right to go to the island or go to the land, plant the flag. That was what happened. And so then to also wipe out So if you weren't able to, or you weren't wanting to be baptized or to have Christianization in your family or your community, then it wasn't an option for you not to have it. The thinking was that you would be put out of your misery because your life was not worth keeping and not worth saving. And so individuals their lives were ended because they didn't believe in Christianization. When we look at terra nullius is looking at the land. So if land wasn't fenced off and there wasn't anything that planted themselves on the land to say this land is personal ownership, it's my land, then also the land was up for the taking, or land was empty. And so it was the responsibility of those who were under exploration and discovery to make sure that land was doing something productive. When in fact it actually was, and it was inhabited, it was being utilized, just not in the same way that explorers and discoverers find it. So it's really coming down to philosophy and belief system. So that granted concepts of superiority, the right to make decisions on behalf of the church and state in the best interest of Indigenous populations for their better good. And so when we have that mentality, that leads easily into these other pieces. And so when we think of the Hudson's Bay Company, what role did the Hudson's Bay Company have? I'm just going to put this down here at the bottom. In 1670, they were granted a fur trade monopoly for all of the land that drained into the Hudson's Bay, the drainage. And so King Charles II of England granted that in 1670. And the reason I include that is because, residential schools are in the 1880s, let's say. And so there's a 200-year period that there's already contact with the Hudson's Bay Company, with a new economy, moving from trading with one another, with individual Indigenous nations or Indian tribes, as they were referred to at that time. Not only in Canada, what we know to be Canada, but also the US. So there was no border crossing, there was no country division, all the way into South America. The trade routes were extensive. They were not limited by, I can only walk to this area. So the trade areas were massive. And they were operating, they were successful, they were able to bring corn, people were able to trade what they didn't have in their territory, fish, wild game, berries, medicines, all of that was part of it. And so that traditional economy changed when the Hudson's Bay Company was granted a fur trade monopoly. And the economy changed. And so when we think of, what kinds of changes were happening between 1670 and 1870, the Royal Proclamation, because there was wars, there was, already world battles happening, not here on this territory, but that were brought over to the territory. So, there was just a lot of action happening south of us as well as across the waters. And so the Royal Proclamation and any legal title, anybody who's going through court, all Aboriginal title stems back to the Royal Proclamation of 1763, because it defined Indian tribes as being sovereign nations, as having distinct language, culture, belief system, as having that comprised a nation. And so that's why all Aboriginal title and any kind of legal title will always go back to the Proclamation of 1763. When we go forward to 1867, with Upper Canada, Lower Canada, these are the four provinces, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. These are the four that entered into Confederation, because from 1670 to 1867, there's changes that are happening. So it's 200 years of trade. And in the late 1860s, the Hudson's Bay Company began to rethink, what are we doing? This territory, because it's not a territory that was by itself. We have to think of the fact that there were other territories south of Rupert's Land, is what it was known as. And so the U.S., the colonial relationship that the U.S. had with Great Britain. And so the history that happened south of us impacts the history that's happening here in the Dominion of Canada, as it became to be known. The Prime Minister was Sir John A. Macdonald. And so the sale of Rupert's Land from HBC, from the Hudson's Bay to the British Crown in November 1869. So there's some key dates and key things that happened. The title was transferred to Canada on July 15th, 1870. So it was delayed. There was a delay from November 69 to July 1870 because of when we think of Manitoba and we think of what's happening in the West, there's already action happening that's affecting the federal state. And the other piece that the four provinces that wanted to purchase Rupert's Land from the Hudson's Bay Company, which in all history books, it's really it was an illegal land sale. £100,000 or $1.5 million is what the sale was for. But they had no money. So, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, led by Sir John A., had no money to buy this land. So Great Britain loaned the money to Canada to purchase Rupert's Land. So if you want to actually take a look at the deed of surrender, I've included it here for you to look at. Where do we go from here? So we go from having the papal bull, going through the Royal Proclamation, having 1867 the British North America Act, the sale of Rupert's Land to create the Dominion of Canada, the Confederation. So there's a whole lot of history that is underlying, cooperatives, underlying reconciliation. Residential schools are created because of that mindset, because of the papal mindset, the doctrine of discovery, Terra Nullius. And, is that mindset finished? Is it gone? Or is it still alive and well in certain corners and certain boardrooms and certain operations in our provinces and in corporate Canada, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, at the federal level? It's not gone. It's still here. And so when we think about Idle No More and, the actions that individuals have taken, it's always in resistance to a philosophy, a certain way of thinking, the value of somebody else. So I just wanted to share with you a few Cree words. Iskudeo is the word that we use in the Cree language, and it's dialect neutral, we call it. So you can say Iskudeo in Plains Cree, Swampy Cree, Woodland Cree, and it means the same thing. And it's derived from two other words, so Iskweo and Mitday. So Mitday is the heart, and Iskudeo is really describing, it's physically describing, being descriptive, that, a fire really is it's the heart of the nation, the heart of our people. It has a life and a spirit. And so there's a whole piece that describes that, what the role is of fire in our communities. But this, I think, for me, symbolizes the sacred role that Indigenous women played in the family systems, in the communities, and the nations. Because all Indigenous societies and economies, I was just on a call before this one, and I'm in my studies for Indigenous language revitalization. The role that women played was critical to success. And so women had a very important role to play, not only in the family, but also in the community, the society, and there were women's councils. And so, even for treaty making, there was a women's council that was consulted, prior to signing the treaty. And there were women's societies as well. And so, there was a lot of not so much power, but there was, what would you call it? Because power wasn't really a part of the equation. It was respect. And so for Indigenous communities, the role that women had was a respectful role. It was a sacred role because they carried life. And so women they were held in a sacred role, in a sacred position, like fire. So in order for you to have food, you have to cook it somehow. In order to not freeze, you have to have a fire. So you have to keep that fire going, and you have to keep the women going in a community. The women's responsibilities are great. So I think the video just mentioned quickly about how the Indian Act affected women and how it affected men as well. So legislation, federal legislation, that Indigenous people were not allowed to be a part of. So you couldn't be a part of the legislation that was then going to be directing the rest of your life and affecting the rest of your life. greatly affected who you were as an Indian woman. So if you married somebody who was not, or even had children with somebody who was not a registered Indian, a status Indian according to the Indian Act, then you would become enfranchised. You would lose your status. You would no longer be allowed to live on the reserve and maintain your status. And the same for men. If they're, because at that time university was not open to women, so men were the only ones eligible to attend, and most of the training was really in the ministerial training. So they went and trained to be ministers. So you could train to be a minister and still maintain your status. But if you wanted to do training to be a nurse, a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, then you lost your status according to the Indian Act. So when we think about systems put in place to try and stop people from growing or stop people from learning, those are the systems. Unpacking some meaning. So wahkotowin, this is a way of having relationships with one another and with the community. So the act of working together, working on something together. So everybody working together, working on something. So one of the harsh realities we have in our communities is that yes, there's lots of socioeconomic challenges, but how can we combat that? Like, what is the solution? There's been many things that have been tried. What I know, and just from my own experience and working in this area, is that Indigenous language, culture, ceremonies, belief systems, that's the foundation of what we need to get back to. And thankfully, we do have some support. There's the Indigenous Languages Act, and there's people who've been hired. It's a thing, whereas before it was not a thing. It was not prioritized. It might have been in a K-12 system, for 40 minutes once every second day, or once a week. But that isn't what we need. We need to get back to the ceremonies and back to the meanings in the language. In unwrapping decolonization, it's a daily task to do that. So it's not just one time that it happens. I was talking to a friend earlier this morning, and I said, being able to access education as a First Nation, as a status Indian person, in Saskatchewan, it isn't like hundreds and hundreds of years ago that if you were a status Indian person and you wanted to go to university, that you couldn't go to university unless you gave up being a status Indian, and which also meant that you couldn't live on the reserve. You basically you were excommunicated from your community. So it's not that long ago that was part of our reality. So being punished for practicing spirituality, that also is not like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That's in our lifetime. Attending residential school, that's not hundreds and hundreds of years ago. That's within this lifetime of people who are here. And so unwrapping decolonization, understanding what it is, that's a daily task for us. There's a couple of websites I'll leave here that I found really interesting. They're Learning the Land, it's called. And so, there's a short video of about 10 minutes long that the youth are talking about what their perspective is. And it's a really, it's an awesome video to watch on your own time. And it takes a look at Southern Saskatchewan. So the Treaty Education Alliance is an organization. And so they're working to support their member nations and, incorporating language, incorporating land teachings in that. And so I just wanted to say, to plan for our future, we must know our past. By understanding this, we can appreciate our present and work towards a better tomorrow. And our greatest strength is as leaders, educators, and parents really lies in our ability to be humble. So if we can't be humble, then, we're also not able to be strong, because humility and strength are one piece of the same puzzle. And this is my contact information. And I'll send the PowerPoint as well to Tristan. She can send it out to you. Ikusan, ma? So I just wanted to make sure I screeched in just before 3:00. So it's 2:57. We have 3 minutes for questions. I'll turn it back to Trista.
Well, thank you so much, Charlotte. It was just an honor, and it's such a large topic and try to squeeze that into an hour. Thank you. And I will just open it up for questions. So if I see one from Clayton, and then we'll go to Simon.
Hi. Thanks a lot. That was a really informative presentation. When it comes to the TRC calls to action, I noticed you put up the call to action 92 there, and if I'm correct, cooperatives first helps write bylaws, and is that something that Cooperatives First does, is like integrate into new cooperatives bylaws, TRC calls to action?
Well, both Kyle and I work on that, but mostly Kyle as our governance lead. We get the group and the co-op, if they want it reflected within their bylaws, we will put it in there. So our job is not to put together a co-op for people, and just say, here's your co-op, here are the bylaws you have to abide by. It's so important to get the members buy-in, and it's their voice and their co-op and their rules that they abide by. So we will help incorporate those. I had mentioned that we did the Elders Co-op late last year, and that was such a pleasure and an honor to work with these elders. And it's actually our first co-op that we're able to incorporate where parts of it actually had the Soto language in their incorporation documents and their bylaws. Of course, we had to translate it for the province, so that way the provincial registrar wanted to make sure we weren't using any language that was inappropriate. So we did have to have it translated, but we're really, really happy and proud that we're able to get these government papers with the Soto language incorporated in them.
Yeah, I think it's I think it helps, and certainly is a interesting thing to follow. We're working on a bike share cooperative of local cycling nonprofits across Western Canada, and knowing the value, the shared values of other cycling nonprofits, I see that could be something that the members would be very interested in. Yeah, we'd be happy to help. And yeah, it comes from the members. That's something that's really important to have those calls to action. Yeah, we could help with that.
Thanks for the question, Clayton. I was going to say, it's such our education systems have really not done a proper job, especially when it comes to Indigenous history or the history of the true history of Canada. So I think that's part of our role, wherever we go, is to educate one another, because not everybody knows the history, and we might know the history, but we only know this much of the history. So being able to understand the full history, and the history is not to say I lay blame at somebody's doorstep. The history is just to say these are the facts, and this is what happened, and where are we going to go from here. So thank you for the question, and thanks for the response, Trista.
Okay. So the next question I have is from John.
Hi, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was really, really good, very enlightening, very interesting, and for sharing the information in the chat too. That's very useful. I'm a member of the CII Reconciliation movement on the Sunshine Coast in BC, which is a joint project between people of the Shishal Nation and settler community on the Sunshine Coast. And there's a group of us who started a co-op with the help of Cooperatives First, and they were absolutely fantastic in that work, to start and operate a long-term care facility that would be a multi-stakeholder cooperative. And one of the stakeholders would be the Shishal Nation. And interestingly enough, this is kind of a sad commentary, but I think it's an important one. When we wrote an article for the internet announcing our group, we referenced ourselves as settlers on the Sunshine Coast, and feeling that was an accurate depiction of who we are. And one of the very first pieces of feedback we got from people from other settlers was, don't use the word settler. And when I asked why not, they said, oh, because it's not a nice word. And I said, but that's who we are. And it's an honest and transparent part of the relationship with the Shishal Nation is acknowledging who we are and how we came to be here and what our relationship is to the land and to the Shishal people. Nonetheless, we stuck with the word, but it caused a fair bit of discontent among some folks, unfortunately. But it's a learning process. And as you said, the more that we share with how we came to be here and the situation that we're in now and how to move forward together, the more people will come to recognize and understand why some of those terms are so important. And so that leads me to my question, which is that one of the things that's happened with one of the things I've noticed with our project is that the Shishal Nation signed an agreement with the province of British Columbia and Canada a couple of years ago, and we were hopeful that would help to encourage the settler community on the Sunshine Coast to consider working more closely in the spirit of reconciliation with the Shishal Nation around community economic development, particularly in terms of cooperative community economic development. But that hasn't really transpired. Instead, what we're seeing is a tendency for people to just sit on their hands and say, okay, there's this agreement, and apparently the nation has expanded rights and an expanded say over the use of the territory on the Sunshine Coast. What does that mean in practical terms? I'm just going to carry on with the way I've been doing things since day one and carry on with the way I've been doing business since day one until I see some evidence that there's some practical reason for me to do otherwise. And so I'm wondering if UNDRIP might be the ticket to that the implementation of UNDRIP from a legal perspective might be the incentive that helps because often, as you know, with co-ops, people need a reason to cooperate and a reason to do something together. And so I'm wondering if UNDRIP might be the incentive that people need to come to the table and sit down and talk. I don't know what you think about that, but because until now, UNDRIP has been, unless it's enforced, it's kind of a meaningless. It just sounds good. It's a public relations exercise, right? Mm-hmm. Prior and informed consent over, for example, the use of the land on the Sunshine Coast, which is rich in natural resources, particularly fish and forestry, most of which are controlled by the non-Indigenous community. You know, what does prior and informed consent mean from a practical point of view, and how can we use that to bring people to the table to work together?
Mm-hmm. So I think I'll just take a reply to your question, John. And UNDRIP it's been there for a long time. It's been and countries have to sign on to UNDRIP, so they have to sign on to support it. There has to be that willingness to do it, and so that's the question. So willingness, can you force willingness through the court system? Yeah, sometimes you can, and sometimes you get good results, and sometimes you don't get very good results. But it's really that wahkotowin. So it's really the relationship building. It's making family. So when I go out to the coast or to the island, because that's where my studies are in Victoria, I'm a visitor to the island, and so I'm a welcomed visitor to the island because I'm in a program of study. And so it's really the relationship, like how we are relating to one another. And so, when there's resistance, there's usually resistance because of a preconceived notion of what individuals think they're going to lose. And so, it's having to work through all those dynamics of, it's Stephen Covey, 7 steps, it's win-win, it's synergy, we're in this together, we're not going anywhere and you're not going anywhere. So let's work on a solution. So I think they should all read 7 Habits to Highly Successful, Highly Effective People before you start negotiating.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah, we are running a bit long, but yeah, as long as people are interested and continue to this conversation going. I have a question, which I really glad that Charlotte, we had many conversations prior to talking, and it just having more people involved in these types of talks. And a question I had posed to you in one of our earlier conversations, and I loved your response, is the term decolonizing has been used quite often. And my question to you is, do you see the co-op model as an effective tool in this large topic and this large idea of decolonization?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, actually, when we think about decolonization, so first of all, have to understand, I think, what is colonization? So what does colonization look like? What is it? How is it defined? What does it mean? It has a context. So everything is built into a context and a place and a situation. So decolonization is having to undo those. So all those ways that colonizing did happen, and colonizing still continues in all over the world. It's not just here in Canada. So when I think of decolonization, it's as simple as, what's the territory I work in? Who really are the elders in the communities that I work in? What's my purpose? Why am I here? What's my end goal? Like, what do I really, really want? And those questions are part of that second last slide on the land slide with the Treaty Education Alliance. So, it's such a wonderful resource that it walks you through the steps, and you actually go through and you get a chance to do self-reflection. So decolonization is for us all a daily task. How am I decolonizing? Am I decolonizing the way I think? Is it, because it's a power structure and it's relationship building. So, is it, learning the names of the nations that I do business with? Because, some of our nations here in Saskatchewan, we can spell them out using the English alphabet, and we can kind of, do a pretty good job of pronouncing them. But when you go into other territories and they're naming themselves using their language and their orthography and in their symbols, that's especially when you go out into the British Columbia nations, there's a whole variety. And so that's an act of decolonization, is making a concerted effort to say, how can I say something? How can I pronounce a word so that I'm not insulting the nation by making a really big mess of it? And just, establishing that relationship with the communities. So, decolonization is really simple, but it's also really complicated. It's our land, it's the language, it's our culture, our songs. And I just wanted to say, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to read from Richard before I start. I forgot to read from Richard before I started. But if anybody ever has a chance to read this book or see this book, like, he's just he's the best. He's the real deal. And thankfully, he wrote a lot. And so, he says, the words in this book are embers from the tribal fires that used to burn in our villages. They are embers from the spiritual fires burning in the hearts, minds, and souls of great writers on healing and love. They are the embers from every story I've ever heard. They are embers from all the relationships that have sustained and defined me. They are heart songs, spirit songs, and shared with you. They become honor songs for the ritual ways that spawn them. Bring these words into your life. Feel them, sit with them, use them. For this is the morning, excellent and fair. And I just absolutely love, the insights that Richard Wagamese had the gift of being able to put pen to paper and bring his life to life and bring his outlook to life. And that's really, for me, what decolonization is, as simple as honoring, some of the thoughts and some of the words that Richard Wagamese has. And it's also a really beautiful book. It has lots of great imagery in it. And it's as simple as saying, I don't know anything, so where do I start? And who can help me on that journey? So there's lots of people in the room who would be more than willing to help. And, oftentimes, we'll get better results when we're saying, Kigawitsit, I'll help you along, Astam, Kigawitsit. And so any of our elders, our knowledge keepers, storytellers, singers, they're not in the courtroom fighting and battling. That's not where they are. They're out here in the community, and they're waiting for people to come and say, I have a story I'd like to tell you. And that story is going to change how we see things and how we interact with people and how we see ourselves. It's going to go back to answering those questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What's my goal? How can I make this world better? So I hope I answer some of your questions, Trista.
Thank you, Charlotte. Is there any other questions? No. John?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm always afraid of mispronouncing words as a settler. And I just want to encourage everybody to make an effort to do that, because what I do is I start out by saying, oh, I hope I'm saying this right. Or after I say it, I'll say, oh, I hope I didn't butcher that. And I find 99% of the folks that I work with in the Sechelt community will be very gentle and very nice to me and say, well, actually, that's pretty good. It's close, but this is actually how you say it. So it's not to be afraid of that.
Exactly. And I wanted to say, when I went out there, there's a document. I have to look in my tickle trunk to find it, but there is a document that has the phonetic sound of the nations and of some of the words, some of the language that is used. And so I found that really helpful, and just listening to it. So I don't necessarily pay attention to all the symbols for me to learn, but I do, I go back and listen and I think, okay, so now I can actually pick up, different. I'm not an expert in all languages, but I can pick up certain languages and know where people are from. For sure, in Saskatchewan, it's easy. Alberta and Manitoba, but going out into British Columbia it's quite complicated because there are so many languages and they're so distinct from one another. But I'll have to look for my cheat sheet on pronunciation, because it really helped. It was actually created by British Columbia, by an organization in British Columbia, to help with that and to open the door to pronunciation in a good way.
Okay. So I would like to thank everybody for attending today's session. And I invite you to join us on our next webinar, which is on March 25th. And if there's a topic that anybody is interested in hearing more or would like to hear more, email me. Reach out to me. Let me know what you're interested in. I am here to just bring awareness of the co-op model. We have past webinar recordings on our website, yourwaytogether.ca. And our next topic and discussion is we, as cooperatives, first will be answering everybody's burning questions on what is a co-op and why should I care? Like, why are co-ops so important? Me personally, learning that co-ops are built on relationships. And as an Indigenous person, and the relationship between myself, my family, my community, the land is super important. And the co-ops is just a way of doing business by incorporating these relationships. So any questions you have on co-op, let me know and attend the next session. It'll be very interactive. We want to see, and if you want to know what our favorite co-ops are or some of the projects we've worked on, we are here to answer those questions. So in the meantime, I did send out emails and reminders and actually have my contact information and also a link to, if you want to book a meeting with me and talk one-on-one through Zoom, book a meeting with me and we can talk and discuss, and I can answer any questions, or if you have an idea of a co-op and you want to know how it might work, let me know. We also have a monthly newsletter called Your Way Together, and it's on our website, yourwaytogether.ca. So just don't forget Your Way Together. It's anything, and you will get in touch with me that way. And a big thank you to Charlotte. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. So until next time, muchas, and thank you.